My fiance tried to embarrass me at our wedding. So I turned the tables by calling everything off. Now she's begging for another shot. Hey everyone, before we dive into today's story, I could really use your support. Lately, the channel has been slowing down, and one of the best ways you can help is by subscribing. It's quick, completely free, and allows us to keep bringing you great content. Your support truly means the world, and together, we can keep growing this community. Thanks a ton! Now, let's get into today's video. All right, Reddit, this one's going to be a long ride. I'm 28 million, and I was supposed to tie the knot with my fiancée, Amy. 27,000 just last week. To be honest, I'm still struggling to wrap my head around everything that unfolded. We'd been together for 4 years, and I genuinely believe she was my perfect match. We first crossed paths at a BBQ hosted by a mutual friend. Amy was this incredibly vibrant person who could light up any space she walked into. Not going to lie, she seemed way out of my league, intelligent, stunning, and hilarious. Our first date? Unforgettable. I wanted to impress her, so I took her to this high-end restaurant, but they messed up our reservation. Instead of getting upset, she laughed it off and suggested we grab hot dogs from a street vendor and eat in the park. That's when I realized she was different. The first 3 years of our relationship felt like something straight out of those overly perfect r/relationships posts. The ones people assume are fake because they're too good to be true. Amy was always there when life got tough. When my grandfather passed away last year, she took care of everything, called my boss to get me time off, made sure I was eating, and even handled all the family arrangements so I could focus on grieving. She'd leave little notes in my lunch before big meetings at work. One time, she even learned how to make my mom's lasagna because she knew I missed homemade food. She was also just a blast to be around. We'd go on spontaneous road trips with no plan, just for the adventure. She helped me loosen up and stop taking life so seriously. My friends adored her because she made game nights even better. My sister, on the other hand, never really connected with Amy, though she never said anything outright. At the time, I didn't think it was a big deal. Then, about 6 months ago, things started shifting. At first, it was subtle. Small things I brushed off. She began bringing up her ex, Tom, more and more. We'd be watching TV, and she'd randomly say, "Oh, Tom loved this show." Or, "Tom never understood stuff like this. He was so basic." I figured it was harmless. Everyone mentions their exes from time to time, right? But then her pranks started taking a different turn. Amy had always been into jokes, but they used to be lighthearted, things we could both laugh about. Like one time, she replaced all my socks with bright pink ones before an important meeting. It was funny because I had shoes that covered them anyway, but lately, her pranks had started feeling mean. The biggest example? When I landed a huge promotion, something I'd been grinding for 2 years to achieve, she didn't celebrate with me like she used to. Instead, she made a speech at my party, right in front of my colleagues, boss, and parents, joking that I must have just gotten lucky and that my boss probably felt bad for me. The entire room went silent while she laughed. The Amy I knew would never have done that. She used to be my biggest supporter. The proposal was when I really started noticing something was off. I spent months planning everything, saved up for a high-end restaurant, got her favorite flowers, even arranged for a custom dessert with the ring inside. When I got down on one knee, she let me sit there awkwardly for 5 whole minutes, pretending she wasn't sure if she wanted to marry me. Everyone in the restaurant just stared. When she finally said yes, she laughed it off, saying it was just a joke. Something felt wrong. The Amy I fell in love with might have teased me for a second, but she wouldn't have left me feeling humiliated like that. Looking back, I realized that the very things I once loved about her spontaneity, her humor, her outgoing personality, had changed. It was as if she wasn't doing things for us anymore, but for attention or entertainment at my expense. Anytime I tried to tell her how her jokes were making me feel, she'd brush it off with, "OMG, babe, learn to take a joke," or, "Why are you being so sensitive?" The old Amy would have cared. We used to be able to talk about anything. Even my best friend started picking up on the shift. He'd pull me aside and ask, "Dude, is Amy okay? She's acting different." But I kept making excuses for her, clinging to the memories of how great things used to be. I kept telling myself maybe she was just overwhelmed with wedding planning or work. The Amy I originally fell for was thoughtful, kind, and made me want to be a better person. She'd surprise me with my favorite snacks when I was having a rough day, remember tiny details from conversations months ago, and always knew how to cheer me up. That's why it took me so long to see the changes. When you love someone that much, you don't want to notice the bad. But man, the signs just kept piling up. Looking back, it's like watching a replay of a game where you already know the ending. The red flags seem so obvious now, but when you're in it, you just keep hoping things will go back to the way they were. Then, about 2 months before the wedding, things got even stranger. The kind of strange where you can tell something's off, but you just can't quite figure out what it is. And that's when Amy started talking about her ex. I'll refer to him as Tom. She mentioned him way more than she ever talked about us. It was always in this weird, backhanded way. Like we'd be at dinner, and I'd be telling her about an exciting new project at work, and she'd say, "This is why you're so much better than Tom. He could barely do basic math, and here you are managing million-dollar deals." Or we'd be grocery shopping, and as I checked nutrition labels, trying to eat healthier, she'd casually remark, "Tom never cared about this stuff. He just grabbed whatever was cheapest." He was so simple. At first, I assumed she was just trying to compliment me, but the more it happened, the stranger it felt. We'd be watching a documentary on space, and she'd shake her head, saying, "Tom would never watch something like this. It was too complex for him. All he ever did was watch sports." But the way she said it, it was odd. Almost like she missed how uncomplicated he was. Then I noticed she was glued to her phone, constantly. Whether we were having dinner, watching TV, or even trying to sort out wedding details, she'd get texts and quickly turn her phone away whenever I walked by. Normally, I'm not the jealous type, but something didn't sit right. One night, she fell asleep on the couch while we were watching a movie and her phone lit up. It was only for a second, but that was enough. "Tom," my stomach sank. The message preview flashed on the screen. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow." And just like that, it disappeared. My mind fixated on every little detail, the casual way his name appeared on her phone, the fact that she still had his number even though we were engaged, the tiny emoji that should have been meaningless but suddenly carried weight I wasn't ready to unpack. I tried to take a breath to convince myself it could be innocent. Maybe she was just catching up with an old friend. Maybe it was something wedding related, but my gut twisted, telling me what I didn't want to admit. From that moment on, I started paying attention. Where she went, how long she was gone, the little things in her stories that didn't add up. She kept talking about all these wedding planning meetings with her bridesmaids, but something felt off. So, one day I decided to follow her. I felt ridiculous like some paranoid boyfriend in a bad movie, but I needed to see the truth for myself. She drove downtown and pulled into a coffee shop, parked, and walked in. No bridesmaids, no wedding planners, just him. Tom was already sitting inside at a table near the window, waiting for her. I stayed outside lingering by a lamppost, trying to stay unnoticed. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I watched them. They weren't just chatting, catching up like old friends. There was familiarity between them, comfort, ease, the kind that only comes from history. Like this wasn't the first time. She laughed at something he said, tilting her head in that flirty way she always did, twisting a strand of hair between her fingers, flashing that warm, intimate smile, the one I thought was reserved for me. My hands balled into fists. My entire body tensed. I wanted to storm inside, confront her, call her out in front of everyone. But I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. I just stood there, watching through the glass, feeling like an idiot who hadn't seen this coming. Like a fool who believed he was marrying the love of his life when, in reality, she was already slipping away. I didn't confront her that night. Maybe I should have, but I wanted to see how far she'd go. Over the next few weeks, the lies piled up. She'd tell me she was out shopping for a wedding dress with her mom. But then her mom would call, asking me questions about wedding details at that exact time. She'd claim she was stuck at work late. But one of her co-workers, who I happened to be friends with, casually mentioned she'd left early that day. Even her bridesmaids were acting weird. They'd exchange glances whenever wedding plans came up, whispering in hushed voices and suddenly going silent the moment I walked by. all except one of them. I'll call her Jen. She was quieter than the rest and worked at the same company as me. Jen always seemed uneasy when the other bridesmaids started giggling about something. I remember one particular day at the wedding venue, Amy was talking about Tom again. She made a comment about how he could never afford a place like this, how he still lived in his tiny college apartment with roommates. But the way she said it, it wasn't mocking, it was almost fond. Then she turned to me and said, "That's why you're so much better, babe. You have real ambition." Tom was just simple. The way she lingered on the word simple sent a chill down my spine. That same day, Jen pulled me aside, looking nervous. She started to say something, hesitating, like she wasn't sure if she should. "Look, there's something you should..." But before she could finish, Amy walked back over, and Jen immediately shut down, walking away without another word. The breaking point came when I overheard Amy on the phone in the backyard. She thought I was at work, but I'd come home early with a headache. I heard her laughing about something before she said, "Yeah, he has no idea. He totally thinks I'm at wedding planning meetings." Then she glanced up and saw me standing by the window. Her expression froze. She ended the call immediately, plastering on a fake smile as she rushed inside, acting like nothing had happened. She tried to play it off, saying she was just talking to her sister about a surprise she was planning for me. But in that moment, I knew whatever was happening between her and Tom, whatever ridiculous game she was playing, it was over. Even before I uncovered the rest. Before I found out about the humiliating prank she had planned. Before everything went down on our wedding day, I already knew our relationship was finished. The trust was gone. But here's the thing, I didn't say a word. Call me petty, but I wanted to see what she was planning. All the secret meetings, all the strange comments about Tom, all the whispered jokes between her bridesmaids, something was coming. And knowing Amy, with how much she loved her pranks, I had a feeling it wouldn't be pretty. I had a gut feeling something major was coming. I just never imagined it would be what it was. Looking back, maybe I should have confronted her. Maybe I should have called off the wedding right then and there. But honestly, I'm glad I didn't. So there I was, about 3 weeks before the wedding, sitting in my car outside the same coffee shop where Amy was meeting up with Tom again, and I knew I had to act. I'm not usually the type to think ahead. Amy was always the one organizing everything in our relationship, but something deep inside told me I needed a backup plan. I dialed my friend Mike. Now, Mike is a corporate lawyer, always sharing these wild stories about divorce cases he's handled. We've been friends since college, and he's personally witnessed Amy's pranks. Like that time at his birthday party when she posed as a singing telegram just to humiliate him in front of his entire law firm. He never really liked her after that. As I sat there, watching Amy laugh at whatever Tom was saying, I told Mike, "Dude, I need your help. I think Amy is up to something for the wedding, and I don't think it's good." Mike was silent for a moment, then simply said, "Get to my office." Now, I'll never forget sitting in that sleek office while he listened to everything. When I finished, he looked at me seriously and said, "We need insurance." Then he grabbed a legal pad and started writing. "Look," he said, "I can't stop her from pulling whatever she's planning, but we can make sure she regrets it." We spent nearly 4 hours drafting an entirely fake prenup. According to Mike, it wouldn't hold up in court for more than 5 minutes, but that didn't matter. It looked completely real, filled with complex legal jargon I didn't even understand. The key was a specific clause about public embarrassment. I still have a picture of it on my phone. If either party deliberately engages in an act of public humiliation against the other before the signing of this contract, all jointly planned financial responsibilities will be immediately voided, and the offending party must issue a public apology. Mike even went the extra mile, adding lengthy explanations of what constituted public humiliation and financial obligations, throwing in references to fake case law to make it look airtight. The finishing touch? An official-looking stamp and a notarization from his secretary to make it appear legitimate. Amy had a habit of signing anything put in front of her. She even admitted once that she never read her apartment lease. Mike was convinced she wouldn't question it. I placed the prenup in a black folder and handed it to my best man, Dan, instructing him to keep it close during the wedding, just in case. Dan thought I was being ridiculous, but he's known me since childhood and could tell I was genuinely worried. As we worked through the details, I started feeling guilty. Was I taking this too far? Was I just being paranoid? But then I'd remember how Amy kept sneaking off to see Tom, how she lied about where she was going, how her bridesmaids acted strangely. I told myself I wouldn't use the prenup unless something actually happened on the wedding day. Then, one afternoon at work, Jen, the bridesmaid from my office, showed up at my desk looking visibly shaken. She hesitated, then started to say, I can't keep quiet about this anymore. But before she could finish, Amy's name popped up on her phone screen. The instant shift in Jen's expression told me everything I needed to know. Whatever was coming, it wasn't good. At home, I started noticing even more signs. Amy took long phone calls in the bathroom with the shower running. She'd snap her laptop shut the second I walked in. Once, I caught her deleting text messages while she thought I was asleep. Strangely, she was also being unusually nice, bringing home my favorite takeout for no reason, suggesting we watch movies she usually hated. Looking back, I think she either felt guilty or was trying to keep me off her trail. I honestly don't know. I remember the night before the wedding, sitting in my parents' house, staring at that black folder. Amy insisted we follow the tradition of not seeing each other before the ceremony. I kept wondering, maybe I was wrong about everything. Maybe she really was just planning some harmless surprise. My mom walked in and saw me looking at the folder. She had no idea what was inside, but she could tell something was off. She sat next to me and said, You know, if you're not sure, you don't have to go through with this. I just told her everything was fine. That night, I put the folder in Dan's bag and reminded him to keep it close during the ceremony. He joked that it felt like one of those movie scenes where someone objects at a wedding. But neither of us laughed. The next morning, as I got dressed, I kept thinking about that folder, hoping I wouldn't need it, but feeling oddly reassured knowing it was there. The wedding day itself started out strangely perfect. Almost too perfect. The venue looked incredible, exactly how Amy wanted it. As I got ready with my groomsmen, I kept wondering if I had overthought everything, if maybe I had made a huge mistake. Dan, my best man, took his job seriously. Every few minutes, he'd pat his bag, checking for the folder. The other groomsmen, assuming he was just nervous about the rings, kept teasing him for being so tense. Meanwhile, my mom was already crying happy tears before the ceremony even started, and my dad kept adjusting my tie, despite it being perfectly fine. Looking back, I think they both sensed something was wrong, but didn't want to say anything. I remember standing at the altar, watching as guests took their seats. Amy's bridesmaids huddled together, whispering and giggling, all except Jen, who looked like she was about to throw up. She wouldn't even glance in my direction. Then the music started. Everyone stood. Amy entered with her father, and I won't lie, she looked stunning. Absolutely flawless. And that only made what happened next so much worse. At first, everything seemed normal. The priest was in the middle of his speech, talking about love, devotion, and all that sentimental stuff, and for a moment, I actually started feeling ridiculous for keeping that prenup in Dan's bag. Then we reached the vows. Just before we were supposed to say them, Amy suddenly grabbed the microphone from the priest. He looked completely baffled, but she flashed him a big, confident grin as if to assure him everything was fine. Then, with the enthusiasm of a game show host, she announced, I have a little surprise for my amazing soon-to-be husband. My stomach immediately dropped. Dan, without hesitation, placed his hand on his bag where the folder was tucked away. I caught a glimpse of my dad straightening in his seat. Suddenly more alert, Amy turned to face our guests, beaming from ear to ear, and excitedly said, Everyone, please join me in giving a warm welcome to the true love of my life. The doors at the back of the venue swung open, and in walked him. Tom strolled down the aisle like he was the star of some romantic drama. A smug grin plastered on his face, while the entire crowd turned in their seats, whispering and trying to make sense of what was happening. My mom gasped so loudly it echoed through the room. My sister immediately got to her feet, looking like she was ready to throw hands. One of my aunts simply muttered, Oh no, loud enough for everyone to hear. But Amy wasn't finished. She stood there, practically glowing with excitement, like she had just won a grand prize. She launched into this speech about how she couldn't possibly say, I do, without first getting Tom's approval. Because after all, he had played such a huge role in her life, and they had been talking so much lately. Then, as if this couldn't get any worse, Tom walked right up to the altar and gave me a firm clap on the back, acting like we were old buddies. His smirk made my fists itch. Most of the bridesmaids were giggling, treating this like the funniest moment of their lives. The priest, on the other hand, looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. Meanwhile, Jen had completely lost it, tears rolling down her face as she stared at the scene in horror. Still, Amy wasn't done. Not even close. She pulled out her phone, grinning like she had saved the best part for last. "Oh, and I have something else to show everyone," she chirped. She started scrolling through a group chat with her bridesmaids before flipping her screen toward me. "Look, babe," she said, laughing. "We've had this little bet going on." I stared at the messages, and for a brief moment, my brain just stopped. These women, the same ones who had been helping Amy plan our wedding, had actually been betting money on whether she would go through with it. One bridesmaid had wagered $200 that Amy would fake cold feet at the last second. Another had put down $150 on me, breaking down in tears at the altar. Lisa, the ringleader, had staked $300 on Amy pulling off something huge. Her exact words. There was even a spreadsheet detailed with odds and predictions, like this was some kind of sports game instead of my wedding. The worst part? Some of the messages were from months ago. This wasn't some last-minute joke. They had been planning this humiliation for months. All those wedding planning meetings? They had probably just been sitting around brainstorming ways to embarrass me. Amy scrolled through the chat, laughing like this was the greatest thing ever. "Oh, look, Rachel almost got it right," she giggled. "She said I'd bring a surprise guest. That's close enough to count, right?" Tom, peering over her shoulder, laughed along. "Man," he chuckled, shaking his head, "you really went all out for this one." I scanned the room. Guests were murmuring amongst themselves. Some had already started pulling out their phones. Because, of course, they were recording this. This was about to be all over the internet in 5 minutes. And Amy? She stood there, looking breathtakingly beautiful in her perfect white dress, completely oblivious to the fact that she had just burned our entire relationship to the ground in front of everyone we knew. She poked me in the side playfully. "Come on, babe," she teased. "You're not mad, right? It's just a joke." Then, with a sly grin, she turned to Tom and added, "Unless—" The two of them burst out laughing again. I glanced at Dan. He already had the folder halfway out of his bag, and Amy still wasn't done. She faced the crowd again and declared, "Oh, should I tell them about the backup plan? You know, just in case he actually got upset?" That was when it hit me. This wasn't just a prank that went too far. This wasn't just Amy being Amy. This was deliberate. This was cruel. She had spent months orchestrating this public humiliation. She had looped in her friends, her ex, and probably half the people in this room. I looked at her, standing there, absolutely proud of herself, and I realized I didn't recognize her anymore. This wasn't the woman I fell in love with. This was someone who thought my feelings were a joke. Someone who valued laughs more than love. And at that moment, I decided if she wanted a show, I'd give her one. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and smiled. The calmest smile I had ever mustered. Amy actually smiled back, probably thinking I was finally going along with the joke. I turned to the priest, who, by this point, looked like he was ready to resign from the church entirely. "Hey," I said as politely as possible, "do we have a table set up for signing the marriage license? I just need to grab something real quick." The priest, looking relieved to have any role at all in this nightmare, pointed toward a small table off to the side, probably assuming I was about to even the score. I walked over to Dan. The entire venue had gone dead silent. Everyone was watching, waiting. Amy's smile was still plastered on her face, but I could tell she was getting uneasy. This wasn't part of her script. I reached into the bag and pulled out the black folder, the one Mike had put together. The legal document looked legit. I held it up for everyone to see. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, using my most professional presentation-ready voice, "before we proceed, I'd like to present a document to my dear fiancé." Amy blinked in confusion, tilting her head like a puppy who didn't understand a command. "Wait, what?" I took my time walking back toward the altar, making sure every step was deliberate. I wasn't even shaking. I was ready. "See, Amy," I said, my tone calm and measured. "I had my lawyer put together a little agreement before the wedding. Just a minor precaution, you know." I met her eyes and smiled. "Or, in case you ever decided to pull something like this." I held up the contract for everyone to see, making sure they noticed the official-looking seal at the bottom, the one Mike's secretary had stamped. Amy's face started to pale. "What the hell is that?" she asked, her confident smile finally beginning to crack. "Oh, just a little clause," I said casually, flipping through the pages as if looking for something specific. "See this part right here? It clearly states that if either party publicly humiliates the other before signing the marriage license, then all shared financial obligations, including the wedding, honeymoon, and any joint expenses, are immediately void." The reaction was straight out of a movie. An audible gasp swept through the crowd as the realization hit. Amy blinked rapidly, like she was trying to wake herself up from a nightmare. "Wait, that's not real. That can't be real." "Oh, it's very real," I responded, channeling my best lawyer impression. "And it also states that the guilty party must issue a public apology right here in front of all our guests." For the first time, Tom stopped smirking. Dude," he stammered, "you can't be serious. This is all a joke, right?" I turned to him and flashed the biggest grin I could manage. "Oh, Tom, I take pranks very seriously," I said, "especially when you helped plan this one." Amy was visibly sweating now, her flawless makeup starting to smear. "Babe, this is crazy," she said, her voice losing its confidence. "You're not actually mad, are you?" And that's when I finally said the words I had been rehearsing in my head since the moment I saw her with Tom at that coffee shop. "Mad? Why would I be mad, Amy? This is hilarious. It's all part of the fun, right?" Then, with an exaggerated motion, I snapped the folder shut. "I'm canceling the wedding." Silence. Absolute dead silence. You could have heard a pin drop from the other end of the venue. Amy's perfect smile shattered. "Wait, what?" "Oh, don't look so surprised," I said, tucking the folder under my arm. "You had your fun. Now it's my turn. The wedding is off." Chaos erupted in the room. Guests started murmuring, whispering, gasping, some even audibly reacting like they were watching the climax of a dramatic film. The priest subtly took a step back, as if realizing he wanted no part in what was unfolding. The bridesmaids, who had been giggling just moments ago, suddenly went silent. Amy's complexion went from ghostly white to bright red in the span of seconds. "You're joking," she said, her voice trembling now. "Am I?" I turned toward Dan. "Hey, man, would you do the honors?" Dan, being the absolute legend that he is, took out his phone, pressed play, and suddenly hit the road. Jack started blasting through the speakers. Some guests actually started laughing. Others just sat there in stunned silence. A few wisely got up and started heading for the exits. Amy looked like she was about to faint. "You're not serious," she kept saying. "You're not walking away." I simply grinned. I literally am. I turned to my parents. My mom, still teary-eyed, was actually smiling now, while my dad, for the first time that day, looked proud. "I think we're done here." Without hesitation, my dad stood up and immediately started telling guests the wedding was over. Ever the practical one, my father. Then I turned back to Tom. He was trying to subtly inch his way away from the altar. "Hey, Tom," I called out, making sure the entire room could hear. "You like stealing other people's fiancés, right? Well, congratulations, she's all yours." That wiped the smirk off his face real quick. Amy spun toward him, desperate. "Tom, tell him this is ridiculous." But Tom was already taking slow steps toward the exit. Yeah, I think I'm gonna head out, actually." The bridesmaids had suddenly become very interested in their feet, refusing to look up. Guests were chuckling at the sheer absurdity of the situation. And Amy? She looked like her entire world had just collapsed. "You can't just leave me like this," she screamed. I reached the end of the aisle and turned back one last time. "Amy, you love attention so much. Congratulations. You got it." And with that, I walked out of my own wedding. The next 24 hours were pure insanity. My phone blew up with missed calls and texts from Amy, hundreds of messages flooding in. At first, she played dumb, acting like she genuinely didn't understand why I had left. "It was just a joke," she kept writing. "Why are you being so dramatic?" Then, when that didn't work, she got angry. The messages became longer, more aggressive, accusing me of humiliating her. Ironic, right? She ranted about how I had ruined our wedding over a harmless prank. She even tried to claim that I had no right to walk out like that. But this is where things got really good. Remember that bridesmaids group chat? The one where they were literally betting on ways to humiliate me? Dan, absolute genius that he is, had screenshotted everything before we left, thanks to one of the bridesmaids leaving it open. All the messages, the discussions about how they were going to set me up, the actual bets they placed, even messages from months earlier, where they brainstormed different ways to mess with me at my own wedding. Amy tried to flip the narrative, painting herself as the victim. She even took to social media, claiming I had abandoned her at the altar. But then those screenshots started making their way around. Turns out people really don't like it when you treat someone's wedding like a reality TV game show. The fallout was beautiful. The bridesmaids, who had found everything so hilarious, began freaking out when they realized those messages were now public. Sarah, the maid of honor, she lost a job opportunity because someone sent the screenshots to her potential employer. Apparently, they didn't want to hire someone who thought public humiliation was fun. Then Amy's parents called me. Her mom, sobbing, swore she had no idea Amy would ever pull something like this. Turns out they had warned her not to do anything stupid at the wedding. Her dad, he apologized to me, said he completely understood why I did what I did. Then came the money issue. Amy demanded that I reimburse her for wedding expenses. I laughed. Because here's the thing, I had covered almost everything. The venue, my credit card. The catering, my account. That luxurious honeymoon she had been bragging about for months, booked under my name. One quick call, and everything was canceled. The venue manager was surprisingly sympathetic. Said he'd seen plenty of wedding disasters, but this was a first. The honeymoon cancellation hit hard. Amy had already posted all over social media about our amazing 2-week getaway in Hawaii. Now, she had to explain why. There were no beach pictures. Her bridesmaids? They distanced themselves fast. Funny how people scatter when they realize they're about to sink with you. And Tom? He completely ghosted her. Stopped answering her texts and calls. Guess it wasn't so funny anymore when he became part of the joke. And Jen, the only one who had actually felt bad about it all, finally came clean. She told me everything. And the guilt on her face said it all. Because unlike the rest of them, she never thought any of it was funny. She admitted she had known about the plan for weeks, but felt stuck, torn between speaking up and risking Amy turning on her. Jen told me how she had tried to talk Amy out of it, even begged her to drop the whole thing. But Amy just laughed it off, insisting it would be hilarious to see my reaction. Tom, of course, had no issue going along with it. Probably thought it made him look cool or something. But Jen, she hated every second of it. She told me she barely got any sleep the night before the wedding, her stomach twisting with anxiety, knowing exactly what was about to unfold. And when she saw me standing there at the altar, completely unaware of the setup, she said she wanted to scream, to stop it before it happened. But she froze. As she spoke, her voice was soft, heavy with regret, as if she expected me to resent her for not stepping in. But for the first time in months, I saw something I hadn't in a long time. Actual common sense. Someone who didn't just blindly follow the crowd. Someone who genuinely cared about how other people felt. And honestly, that stayed with me more than the whole wedding disaster ever did. A week after everything, Amy showed up at my apartment. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. She was still wearing her engagement ring. Tears streamed down her face as she told me how sorry she was, how she never meant for things to go that far, how she still loved me and believed we could fix things. I didn't say a word. I just handed her an envelope. Inside was an invitation to a fake wedding rehearsal. Same venue. Same time our actual wedding was supposed to be. The guest list? Everyone who had watched her little prank unfold. No groom's name, just a note inside that read, "Now we're even." She stood there, reading it over at least 5 times before she finally understood. When she looked up, I simply shut the door in her face. Remember all those phones recording at the wedding? Yeah. Clips started popping up online. People started calling her the bride, who got left as a joke. Her own prank had turned into a meme. A few of Amy's friends tried defending her on social media, saying I should have just taken the joke better. But then, more screenshots surfaced, proof of just how long they had been planning this, the money they had bet on it, and all the nasty comments they had made about me in their group chat. Amy tried reaching out to me through mutual friends, claiming she had learned her lesson. But every time someone showed me her messages, they also saw the screenshots. Before long, she ran out of people willing to speak up for her. It's been 6 months since the wedding that never happened, and Amy never really recovered. She kept trying to worm her way back into my life, constantly sending messages about how we could fix things. Like second chances were unlimited and she hadn't already burned through every single one with her ridiculous pranks. But I was done. Her bridesmaids, the same ones who laughed along with her, didn't stick around either. Sarah, the former maid of honor, even sent me this long-winded apology saying she should have warned me that she felt awful about what happened. Too little, too late. Because once the joke ends and the audience disappears, the person left standing in the wreckage is the real fool. And Tom? He completely blocked Amy on everything and started telling people he had been manipulated into going along with it. Last I heard, he had moved back to his hometown and was working at his dad's store. Guess the simple life wasn't so bad after all. Amy's parents are still apologizing every time they run into my family. Her mom even sent me a Christmas card saying she thinks about that day all the time and wishes she had recognized the signs earlier. Her dad, he actually helped me sell the house Amy and I were supposed to move into. But here's the crazy part. Something good actually came out of all this. Jen and I started grabbing coffee together. Just talking, nothing more. Turns out she had liked me for a while, but never said anything because, well, I was with Amy. We started spending more time together, at first just work lunch breaks or the occasional dinner. She was nothing like Amy. Quiet, kind, thoughtful. Someone who actually considered other people's feelings. She never made jokes at someone else's expense. 3 months after the wedding that wasn't, we officially started dating. My parents adore her. Even my sister, who had despised Amy from the very beginning, thinks Jen is perfect for me. Amy eventually found out about us through mutual friends and immediately tried to stir up drama online, claiming Jen had stolen me from her. Nobody bought it. Not with all those screenshots floating around of her planning to publicly humiliate me with her ex. Speaking of Amy, she's still desperately trying to fix her reputation. She even posted this long public apology on Facebook about how she had grown and learned from her mistakes. Then, 2 days later, she showed up in my company's parking lot trying to confront Jen. Security had to escort her out. Meanwhile, my life? It's actually better now. Got a real promotion at work. Unlike the one Amy mocked me for. Moved into a new apartment in a much nicer part of town. Jen and I are taking things slow, no rush. We went on a vacation last month. Nothing extravagant, just a quiet beach trip. But for once, I was with someone who didn't feel the need to document every single second of it for social media. Someone who didn't turn everything into a joke. And oh, one last thing. I still have the prenup folder. Mike, my lawyer friend, he framed it and gave it to me as a birthday present. It now hangs in my home office. Jen thinks it's hilarious. My friends say I dodged a bullet. Honestly, I think I dodged a firing squad. Sometimes I look back at old photos of me and Amy and wonder how I didn't see it coming. But you know what they say? When you're wearing rose-colored glasses, red flags just look like regular flags. And the strangest part? I'm actually grateful it happened. Because if Amy hadn't revealed her true colors that day, I might have married her. Might have spent years dealing with her pranks, her games, completely unaware she had been sneaking around with Tom behind my back. Instead, I'm with someone who respects me. Someone who understands that love isn't about pranks, social media likes, or humiliating your partner for laughs. So yeah, that's where everyone ended up. Amy, still single and living with her parents. Tom, back in his hometown, working at his dad's shop. The bridesmaids, scattered across different states. And me, I'm actually happy. Turns out sometimes the worst day of your life can lead to the best things happening.